Hi. Um, I've just seen a video, which is a condensed video, very condensed, about a minute and a half, covering CNN's coverage of Donald Trump's election victory in 2016, November 2016. Uh, and it's just basically instant reactions. But the one that a lot of people focused on was Van Jones, CNN contributor, commentator. Um, he was obviously upset, and he said this was, and this is quote unquote, white lash, white lash against a black president, referring to Obama. Now, notwithstanding the fact that Obama had already done his 2 terms, so he wasn't eligible to run for a third, and Trump's rival was a white woman, um, I thought that was pretty shameless. Um, just a disclaimer before I continue here. This video is not intended as a defense of Donald Trump. I think Trump is rightly being seen as one of the worst presidents of all time. And I think it's fair to call him a disgraced former president. I don't think that's hyperbole. He's the only man to have been impeached twice in that office. So by definition, he's disgraced. Um, so this video is in no way intended as a sort of apology of Trump's record or anything like that. Maybe it's more a look at the lead up to Trump's election. One thing should be remembered, though: Trump not only Trump lost the popular vote in that election, and he only marginally got the electoral college vote. So you know, let's not give Trump too much praise. And I would always say that to Trump supporters: uh, before you talk about his popularity, just remember he lost the popular vote in 2016 and in 2020, for that matter. But there is an important conversation to be had, and I think far goes beyond Donald Trump, and it's about the role of news media. Um, I've been looking at old archives of various famous events, such as the Kennedy assassination, and I'll be making another video about that, so I don't want to go into too many details. But the moon landing's another one, and one of the sort of figures that comes up often in terms of people sort of looking back to a period of journalism that they see as superior is Walter Cronkite. Of course, done some of the most famous broadcasts of the 20th century. Another example is Britain's David Frost. I recently watched Frost Nixon, um, which had a few small errors, but I think generally it was true to form. I've seen the actual Nixon Frost interviews. Frost was played by Michael Sheen. Um, And there's other figures. Jim Lehrer comes to mind. The late Jim Lehrer, in my opinion, was a great journalist. Larry King, who died last week. Now, for me, King deserves a lot of the credit he gets, but for me, one one stain, if I could put it that way, on his legacy was his work for RT, or going to RT. And I know that was still within his own show, but I have a problem with any journalist that knowingly works for Russian state media, no matter how good they are. Um, but anyway, what I'm driving at here is there is a disconnect between that old school journalism, and there were women as well, Kate Adie in the UK, and others. But there is a disconnect between an old style of journalism and a more new style. And one of the things I find infuriating about CNN, there's things I respect about CNN. I'll just say this. They have the Freedom Project, for example. I think that's a very good initiative. I give them credit for that, because it draws attention to people who really do devote their lives to helping others, and that I give them credit for that. I'd compare it actually to the Daily Mirror, in Britain, the Daily Mirror's Pride of Britain Awards, in which it recognises ordinary people who do extraordinary things. Um, and I don't think CNN is, I remember when Fox News was broadcast here. I don't know if they've lost their license or what, but I haven't seen Fox News directly for a few years now. Um, to me, CNN was definitely superior to Fox News. It was far less sensationalist. I just felt at the time it was more adult. Perhaps with that absence of Fox News, fair and balanced. That's a joke. But perhaps with that absence of Fox News, it's allowed me to be more analytical of CNN. And I still would say it's maybe marginally superior to Fox News, but bias is deeply entrenched. And I think it's a bit galling to hear someone like Christiane Amanpour say, we're only interested in truth. You know, they have these promotional things. She, Anderson Cooper, and others, the mantra is always, we're only interested in truth. It's not about being neutral, it's about being truthful. That's all very well, but CNN has on occasion told fibs. They have on occasion got things dead wrong. Have they went on air and said we were wrong, we hold our hands up, we will improve? No, they've settled out of court. I don't think that's good enough. An example is that young guy a few years ago that was at the March to Life rally. I forget where it was now. It was in one of the Midwest states. But CNN pundits, including Don Lemon, were openly basically calling for this young guy's blood because they said he's an angry young white man, Trump supporter. And, you know, they had this footage of an elderly Native American guy, and they portrayed it as the young white guy was, you know, just being an unpleasant young so and so. Well, it turns out that whole situation was distorted. What had actually happened was the elderly Native American had confronted him. And if you look at the footage, which I have, it's not as CNN portrayed it. Now, they settled that out of court, but to me, that's a bit cardly. You know, here you have a powerful news network with powerful news anchors like Don Lemon and others, and they are stirring up hatred against just a young 16-year-old guy who's, you know, I'm not saying I'd necessarily agree with his politics, but he had a democratic right to protest. He wasn't being violent. Um, and he, of course, spoke at the Republican National Convention. Nice going, CNN. You know, that's an example of their handling of certain situations, particularly around race, which I think is disgraceful. You get people like Don Lemon and Jake Tapper and others who say it depresses them, they don't like talking about it. Well, maybe that's the case, but I honestly believe that along with Donald Trump, liberal news networks also fuel the flames because they will make something a racial issue when that is not the main component. They will always, always, always home in on a race factor every time. So that's the statement by Van Jones. I'd never seen it before. Actually, this was just the first time I'd seen it, but I wasn't overly surprised by it. A white lash. Not only is that an insult to the white people who vote for Trump, because it sort of implies they were so stupid and so angry and so racist that that's the only reason they voted for him. Um, I've no doubt some people voted for Trump for that reason. I've no doubt a few rednecks, a few racists did vote for Trump. Absolutely no doubt about it. But the idea that all white people who vote for Trump were racists, I think, is just lazy journalism, and it's inflammatory. So one may think that now that Biden's in office, this is all going to the culture wars are going to calm down. Not at all. The domestic terrorism level is high. And I think that should be taken seriously. I think any one of those people is a potential Timothy McVeigh. But what I find infuriating about network media in the United States is punditry has taken over hard journalism. You know, when I switch on CNN, literally, I'd say 2 out of 3 times it is punditry. It's one of their presenters just pontificating their own views rather than just reporting the news. Now, I suppose we should follow up with a strong caveat here. There are examples where Donald Trump has shamelessly stoked up animosity and potential intimidation of journalists. That's a disgrace. You know, when they were simply asking questions. Donald Trump was very thin skinned. He was a narcissist. He was very thin skinned. And, you know, when we consider around the world, particularly a country like Russia, where journalists are murdered for doing their job, for the President of the United States to actively turn so much hostility towards journalists is a disgrace, was a disgrace. I think with Biden, you're going to get far more normal press briefings. People might say it's because they're biased towards Biden. I don't think so. I think when Obama was in power, they did ask Obama tough questions. You might contend not nearly as tough as the ones they asked Trump. Okay, but what the Trump politics need to understand is that journalists have to do a job. They have to hold power to account. Now, I honestly think certain hardcore Trump voters, the Trump cultists, as I call them, that's the hardcore ones. I honestly think they want a situation where journalists just blindly praise the leader, akin to some totalitarian state. I mean, One News America is a joke. It's basically just Trump's mouthpiece. Um, but CNN might be the other extreme where it's just negative for the sake of it. I have to say though, Inauguration Day 2017, they were very fair. They covered that very, just as you would expect on an inauguration day. They were complimentary. They were respectful in terms of how they spoke about the new president. So it's useful to look at that. However, the punditry to me is a massive problem, and not just in the States, to an extent in the UK as well. Although perhaps we have a bit more scrutiny of the media. I was going to say Ofcom is there to scrutinise, but I'm pretty critical of Ofcom myself for their failure to take any action against Russian and Chinese state media. In the United States, there was actually, I only discovered this recently, but there is actually something called I think it's something along the lines of the Federal my mind's frozen. It's a federal agency that was set up in the 30s to regulate media output. Um, Censorship would be a controversial word, but media regulation on, for example, if facts are told and if there's falsehoods are told, if there's it's all about ethics in journalism, a lot of stuff like that. But I don't know how that effective that is. It clearly isn't that powerful because if it was, it's classed as an independent agency of the federal government. If it was that powerful, then we would see CNN being held to account a lot more, and Fox News and other networks. Um, I think CNN's incredibly self-righteous. I don't think CNN pundits are ever willing to really admit that there might be a perception problem there. So, Trump's out of office now. They now have a responsibility to show that the allegations against them were hyperbole from Trump supporters. I don't actually think that's necessarily the case. I think it's disgraceful how Trump stirred up animosity towards reporters, that, he's a nasty guy, you know. Um, that's true, but at the same time, CNN didn't always help their case. It didn't. Um, and it's this transformation from hard news of the kind that you'd see from Walter Cronkite or Jim Lehrer to just punditry. I'm not saying there's no place for punditry, but I honestly think most people are tired of hearing it. Where you get this group of people who are no doubt seasoned journalists, but they just sit around and they pontificate for half an hour, whether it be, and it isn't just in the election cycle; it's all the time. I think people get tired of it. We get it in the UK, although I mean we get it more in morning formats. For example, this morning where you get Piers Morgan and Susanna Reid. Um, Not so much in like the 6 o'clock news. Most of the time, that is just hard news. Like this is what happened today. This is the information, and that's it. But I think this is a very, very critical question because I think the mistrust of institutions like cable news is a serious problem for democracy. I really do. Because I think having a free media to hold power to account is extremely important. Now, when that free media, when people just don't trust it, that is a problem. And CNN can't just blame the former president for that because I think the mistrust began before Trump. Certainly, it exacerbated it, but I don't know what their ratings are compared to the past. They say they're the most viewed cable news network. Maybe that's true. Maybe people like sensationalism. Maybe I've got this wrong. Maybe people actually like the punditry. But just from what I see online, there is probably more negative than there is positive in terms of the feedback. Um, I'm not saying these people are bad journalists necessarily, but I do think that once in a while they would be good to introspect. They'll never do it. because I've seen no indication that they're willing to. But yeah, I do see it as a serious problem. Now, in the UK, and I don't want to go off on a tangent here, it's more to do with issues like certainly bias is a big factor, but also the TV license. The BBC really, clings to their guns in this. They say making it just a civic events would encourage people to not pay. Well, I suspect most people wouldn't exactly want a fine. Um, I have a big problem with that. The idea that someone could go to jail for not paying a TV license, whilst violent thugs can get off on a suspended sentence, is perverse. And I know the BBC has no say on, judges' decisions of violent assaults and so on, but this does look kind of, frankly, mean-spirited. It looks like a very powerful corporation wanting to punish the little man, quite frankly. Um, and I don't think they fully grasp the optics of that. If the BBC does lose significant support in the coming years, I don't think they could just blame it on right wingers. They need to look at their own actions. Um, and the license fee issue, it's almost universally unpopular. Even supporters of the BBC recognise that it's absurd that anyone go to jail for not paying it. The Tories have got weak knees at the end, where they caved in. That committee that was supposed to be investigating this, they spoke tough, or we'll stand up to the BBC, and then they caved in and agreed that it would, keep it as a criminal offence, which is a damn disgrace if you ask me. And I think all the powerful executives at the BBC should be ashamed of themselves for so forcefully defending that. You know, last year only 5 people went to jail. In my opinion, no one should be going to jail. If they don't pay the license, give them a fine. Hell, just take away the cable so they can't watch it. But sending someone to jail, I have a very big problem with that. I think it's an abuse of power, and I have a big problem with it. Anyway, I'll leave it there. But this is extremely important because the power that big networks have is immense, and with that power comes responsibility. So any perception of bias, I don't think CNN grasps. I think they honestly think, oh, it's just a few right wingers, a few Trump supporters don't like us because we're criticizing the president. But you get people like me who's a critic of Donald Trump. My politics would be in the center, and I know other center-leaning people who have a big problem with the way CNN covers things.